Hi, it's Warren Huart here. Hope you're doing marvellously well. Today I am hanging out with Natalie. How are you?
I am doing marvellously well, Warren.
Marvellously well. Natalie is an apprentice that we got from Recording Connection. Well, we talk a lot about mentoring. I've done lots of interviews, as you know, with Jack Douglas and Shelley Yakus and a whole bunch of really, really great people that have helped me out. Yeah. And what I want to do is sort of talk about that process because it's double-edged. It's also, you can be in a studio and you can be around it and you can pick up stuff like a lot of traditional studios. People would just learn by just working the sessions. But to me, mentoring can also go one stage further, and we can talk about things like how to use microphones and why we're doing them, how to, you know, whatever it might be, whatever the instrument might be, whether it be a vocal, a guitar, a bass, anything live, virtual instruments, whatever, there's a process that goes into it that you gain experience of after doing for several years. And so I really wanted to show what it's properly like to mentor, as opposed to that sort of vague area of, oh yeah, it was really cool, I hung out in a studio for 6 months. I mean, that's good and that's great, but it's like, for me, it's like, what, 20 minutes and talk about how to use a microphone in the right situation. And it is very rewarding to A, do that, and B, to kind of get that information and that knowledge, and then see it in practice.
And then get a shout out on the Grammy acceptance speech.
There you go.
Future.
Grammy acceptance speech. Well, there you go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the basic kind of vocal miking technique. And we have this Lewitt LCT 940, which I use a lot. So we'll go over there and look at that. I think it's a good mic to use because it has so many different variations of polar pattern. We'll talk about how it high passes, how you can pad microphones, and this particular mic actually has dual tube and FET. But we'll get into all those details. But I want to just give you sort of a breakdown on that because, frankly, if you understand those basics, you can pretty much mic anything. Then you really sort of, just a case of what's the right mic for the right job. And these days, especially with virtual microphones and stuff like that, you have a huge amount of options available. So let's get started. So here we have a large diaphragm mic, which is primarily a vocal mic, but of course you can use large diaphragms on pianos and drums. Very popular for room mics, overheads and stuff. Large diaphragm microphones are accurate sounding microphones. They tend to have a better frequency response, typically a really, really good high-end detail, so they're great for vocals. This is a Lewitt LCT 940, as indicated on this piece of paper here. Actually, this is probably a good sideline to say. Good labeling is kind of useful, especially when you go into that lovely messy live room I've got in there. There's like 10 microphones on stands being used at the moment, recording drums. There's something on the piano over there. It's a big mess of cables. So actually, in good organization, it's kind of nice to label things because we know that this mic actually takes a very specific cable. So labeling it when you're moving things around is quite useful because if this gets lost, yeah, it's a pain in the butt because it's not a standard XLR connection from here to here. Why? Well, because it's powering it. Condenser microphones typically need 48 volts. This one's special because it's tube. A couple of things to note, as in like the old Neumanns, a lot of the control is actually on the mic preamp itself, what is powering the microphone. Most condenser microphones like U87s and 414s and the typical things you'll see in studios have all the controls that we're about to talk about here on the microphone. They'll have, and old Neumanns quite often had either here or sometimes on the power supplies as well. Like I think the C12 has the controls on there, etc. So this is quite straightforward. Very pretty design here. They have the tube in here glowing, or for the English amongst us, the valve. So that's glowing, which is very nice, but it's just aesthetic, just pretty pleasing. So, as you can see, we put a pop screen on. There's a lot of opinions on this. I keep the pop screen relatively close. So here we're looking at, I don't know, 2 inches, whatever that is. What is 2 inches? Like 6 centimeters, 5 or 6 centimeters, maybe a little bit more. Pop screens are to reduce P's and T's and S's and all kinds of pop. Mainly the P's, that's really what you're going to get most of the job out of. So a couple of things. We talked about proximity effect. If you get really, really close, it's going to go really, really warm. If you move back, it gets thinner sounding. I tend to like my singers to sing quite close, so probably that far away is pretty typical. Maybe around about here. everybody has a different thing, but I like the fatness and the warmness. I always record this into a 1073, and then I use a DBX 160 or 165 into a 1176. So
like a fist, basically.
yeah.
And then some, a little bit.
Yeah, and you're going to get, you just have to sort of deal with singers. You don't want it to be so they can eat it like this. Rock guys, a lot of them will do this. They'll push it down like that, and then they'll just kind of like do this and lean in on it, and sometimes physically bang the thing. You know, there's, again though, you know, there's guys that get a 57 or a 58, a Shure dynamic microphone, plug it in, and just do this and sing. You know, the performance is more important. My old girl singer did her first record with Don Smith, you know, 1.5 million years ago, like end of 95, early 96, and she couldn't sing in time. And we're like, you sing in time all the time. And then Don was like, gave her guitar, electric guitar, taped off all the strings, so she couldn't make any noise, and then just stood there with the microphone as she was playing a show and sang at the same time. And suddenly her timing was back, because it was a physical thing. She's like, it was like playing in time and swinging with the music. And I think also for women, at least in my limited experience, you know, of doing that particular one, there's a physicality to it as well. I think some girls, they feel like they have to move with the music. So why am I holding a pencil? One thing I wanted to talk about. This is an English BBC kind of trick that I've shown to millions of people. I've shown to people in studios and then gone back 5 years later and they've shown me, like, I'm like, yeah, I know, I told you. But it's a good way to break up the air. So, you know, quite often you can just tape a pencil across it there and it just breaks up the directivity of a pa. You can also do it on the back and then nobody knows. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do, but yes, it just breaks up the P over there. But yeah, so it's quite straightforward. Like I say, 2 to 3 inches away, singer back about here. You know, just enough of a proximity to get the warmth, but each their own. Some people like singers to be 18 inches back. I tend to go probably a little less than like 10 inches, maybe 12 at the most. But, you know, I know guys that like them back here. Yeah. Again, you know, it also depends on the environment. If you're in a really super dead room, you can get back quite far, and if they're a belter, it's absolutely fine. But if you're in a room with a lot of liveness and stuff like that, you know, sometimes coming back here, you're getting a lot of the ambience. Also, important to remember while we're talking about this, is the microphone is pointing this way, and it's on cardioid, so it's picking up like this. So if you're gonna do some deadening, first place you should do some deadening is where the microphone hears. So if you're going to build a vocal booth, you don't build it around this side, you build it around this side. So if you are going to build a vocal booth and you've got your singer standing here, dampen around here before you dampen her back there. You can buy these things that dampen around there, that's fine, but do it first around this side. If your room's that live that it's still picking up from back there, then buy the little semicircular thing. But if you're building vocal booths, build them around this side first because the microphone is pointing that way. And there's loads of ways you can do this. You can move into the corners of rooms and put up settee cushions. You know, I've seen people do that. Oh. There's all kinds of fun things you can do. It doesn't have to be that crazy. But then if your room's relatively dead, unless you're after like the driest vocal ever, it's also okay to have a little bit of room tone in it. I remember getting a very live vocal and not wanting to and giving it to Mark Endo to mix. And he's like, sounds great. Means I have to put less effects on. So each to their own. And again, what's the most important thing? The performance. So if you got a really good performance and you had a ton of room tone in it, not necessarily the best thing, but it's better than having a crappy performance that was recorded so well, but was absolutely passionless and had nothing that you could identify with. So this is flat. We'll ignore this for the second because this is specific to the mic. But here is pretty typical, although it has 4 controls. 4 levels, I should say. 0 dB means 0 dB. It means no gain reduction whatsoever. It's not padded. You'll hear that a lot. On microphones, even dynamic microphones, you'll get like pads you can put into them, or they might have a pad in them. The pad is because some things you're going to be doing, like screaming singers or drummers, you know, for overhead for drums or anything loud, might distort the signal. So you'll pad it. Shelley Yakis, a good friend who I know you've met, is a really great producer and engineer. He is big on padding. Just get a nice clean signal going into your mic pre. He's really, really big on running pads and stuff. 0 dB means 0 pad. And then if I press this button, I've got -6, so 6 dB reduction in signal. Next up is minus 12, and then it's got minus 18, which is a lot of gain reduction. So I'm assuming that would be for an incredibly loud drummer. Or, I mean, you know, a decent quality condenser like this should be able to go in front of a guitar cab, depending on how loud that is, which could be unbelievable. Okay, so next, we'll bypass this for a second for a reason, because you're not going to see it on another mic. And we'll go over the far right, and the far right is just controlling the polar patterns. This full circle here means omni, and omni means picking up all the way around the microphone. So omnidirectional. If we go a couple of clicks, you've got a cardioid. A cardioid, as you can see, is kind of a heart shape, hence cardioid. And what that means is it's mainly picking up at the front. It's hard to probably see on this little tiny thing, but the back side of it, that's the back side, this sort of that shape. So it means it's picking up from the front and a little bit from the sides. So it's picking up...
Very intuitive shapes.
Yeah, very intuitive shapes. So it's sort of a heart shape around a microphone like this. So next is a hypercardioid, which means it's tighter. So it just means that it's picking up a much tighter pattern, a polar pattern around the microphone, so it gives better rejection. So it means basically better rejection is if there's a ton of other instruments going on in the room or air conditioning and all that kind of stuff. In most live situations, you wouldn't use the condenser microphone. It's just, they're too sensitive, too good. They'll pick up too much stuff and they're very hard to get really tight polar patterns. However,
when would you be using that one?
Well, I mean, I would use a dynamic for live, and I'd use condensers for rooms and ambience and picking up a lot of schnizzle. However, this mic is a little bit more advanced, I think, because if I go 2 more clicks, I've actually got a supercardioid, so it's really, really super tight. But interestingly enough, this is a real good one. The figure of 8, which I also have on a U48, the figure of 8 picks up exactly front and back of the microphone, which the U48 is a very famous microphone because the Beatles used it on all their recordings. It's commonly thought it was a 47, which is identical pretty much to a 48. And the reason why they did that is because John was on one side and Paul was on the other. So they would sing all those harmony parts live together. So when you have 4 tracks that you're recording to, and you need to do 2 vocals, you do it at one time on one microphone on one track. And there's also something unique about that, because when you get guys that have I suppose like an American tradition, more of a barbershop thing, you get the ability to work off each other that you can't get when you're layering vocals. So what I do like about this mic in particular, not that we're selling the mic, but it is a unique feature, we might as well talk about it, is that you can move between these different patterns. You can go omni to cardioid and somewhere in between, and omni to super, to hyper, all the way through to figure of 8. So that's kind of nice. That's not on all microphones. There are some that have continuously variable sort of sweeps. But a lot of the time it's just like cardioid or omni or cardioid and figure of 8. Okay,
well,
yes?
I think the question I'm still having is hyper and supercardioid. When do you use them?
All right, well, it's just really about like how much rejection you need. 99% of your life, it's going to be set to that, to cardioid. Because you want a singer to be comfortable, so you're actually better off with a decent kind of pickup pattern around it. If you use a very tight pickup pattern, you might get, well, a couple of things. When you get really close to a microphone, you get the real proximity effect. It gets really fat and warm. When you move back away from it, it gets a little thinner. If you're on a hyper or supercardioid and you're really tight, that is that reduces to sort of that kind of width. So what you're going to get is you're going to get warmth, perfection, super thin. So cardioid allows you a little bit more flexibility, because singers, unless they're
in the mood.
Yeah, it's like, you know, they singers do this, they move, and we've talked about it before. We talked about it with Lenny and Alex on the acoustic guitar and stuff like that. The last thing you want to do is impose yourself on an artist. You're better off having a slightly not perfectly recorded amazing performance than you are having a perfectly recorded crap performance. All the great guys always made it. You're just about capturing a performance. You're trying to create incredible performances. And yes, there are sonics and there's sounds and all this kind of stuff, but they're there to influence performance. So if you're getting a really amazing amp and you mic it in a completely unique way, which might be unorthodox, that's part of the sonics, you know. But if you're trying to capture something, You don't stop and go, okay, I know you're working out a part and it's perfect now. I need 2 hours to figure out how to record it. And it goes back to the ABR that you hear from all the old guys, always be recording. Shelley Yakos, when I interviewed him, he talked about Dire Straits, the end of Romeo and Juliet, as this beautiful lead guitar part, which is just so sensitive. The song is about a guy who loses his love of his life. And I remember being a kid and being like, for the breakup of my first girlfriend. It's stupid. But I remember like hearing that lead guitar at the end and being like, this is the best lead guitar ever, just like connecting with it. And so I asked Shelley about it because it's one of my favorite songs. And Shelley said, oh, it was a nightmare. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, Mark went to the end of the song and just started improvising this beautiful piece that you hear on the end. That's one take. And he couldn't get it, and then just it clicks and he gets it. And I was like, well, what was bad about it? He goes, he decided to turn his guitar down to like this quiet. And we're in the world of analog where, you probably can't see in camera, but over there is a tape machine. And the thing is, the signal to noise ratio on a tape machine is not too good when you print this level. Because that particular tape machine, and probably the one they were using around about 1980, 81, whenever it was, it had a lot of hiss. So when you print a signal which is this loud and the hiss is this loud, he said as soon as he turned it up, it was like, so it presented a challenge because everyone was freaking out with like, what a great performance that they were hearing coming through the console. They weren't listening off the repro. As soon as they played it back, it was hiss, diddle-a-doo, hiss, diddle-a-doo. So he had to get super creative in EQing it and compressing it in a way that he could pull out that hiss. So it's a very specific sound. And then he put this really cool delay on it to help disguise it. Yeah, so it also goes back to that kind of like, it's great to know all this stuff and be really prepared. Like know the right settings to have on the mic in a situation. So the last thing that's typical with microphones is this here, 3 high-pass filters. So linear means completely flat, printing it, the signal as you hear it. The next selection here is 40 hertz. So what that means is everything above 40 hertz is being recorded, everything below 40 hertz is being rolled off. Now it's not sharp, it's not like this massive nothing below 40 hertz is, but it's going to be like a gentle slope, just getting rid of low stuff. I would say 40 hertz would be great for air conditioning. 150 is good on acoustic instruments, probably ultra boomy acoustic guitars, just because when you're dealing with acoustic instruments, sometimes like an acoustic bass, if it was in the middle of a really, really super dense track with tons of other instruments going on, yes, I might print it exactly how I want to hear it in the mix. But when it might be just one acoustic guitar, like on Trevor's records, it's like one acoustic guitar, one bass, possibly elements of percussion or drums. Then I print it flat because actually the bass might be the lowest thing in the mix. I might want that really low end to just hold the whole bottom end together. But if I'm doing a more rock and roll based thing and I've got a huge kick going, boom, really super low kick, then yeah, I might get away with running a 40 on something because I don't want the bass to go below 40. I want the kick to live between 40 and 60, which is typical. And then next up is 300, which would be, probably overhead cymbal mics that had a lot of boomy floor in it. But again, I quite often print overheads flat as well, and then wait until the mix. If you're blessed to be working with a Vinnie Carluta or a Simon Phillips or a Victor Indrizzo or Matt Chamberlain, if you're working with one of those incredible drummers, you've got a drummer that you can put one mic up anywhere in the room and it sounds like the best drum mix you've ever heard in your life because they play balanced. They go, they don't go, younger drummers, and we're all, hey, when I play drums, it's not balanced. I'm not a good drummer. But a great, great drummer will play in a balanced way and you can throw up any mic. In which case, I would print my overheads completely flat and just be able to just pull up my overheads and go, wow, there's the drum kit. And if it's in phase with my snare, it's like, wow, there's the drum kit the way I imagine it. But if I was doing heavy, heavy rock and everything is smashing the schnizzle out of those cymbals, I might do 300 because there's a lot of booming stuff going on and my cymbals end up just being And if you're not sure, just print it flat and mix it. The better you learn to record, the easier it is to mix. The better you get as a mixer, the easier it is to record because you just share that information. Okay, so the one other feature we might as well talk about, but is unique to at least this microphone, maybe some others, is on the far left is a full tube setting. and on the far right is FET. And this is the only mic that I know of. There may be others that do this. There's a classic microphone made by Neumann called a U47. It's tube. It's a valve microphone. And then there's a U47 FET. So this doesn't claim to be a simulation. It isn't. It's its own microphone. But the great thing about this is you can blend between a FET and between a tube. I personally just use it on tube for lead vocals, and then I go over there for FET and use it for backgrounds. There's enough of a difference in the sound that they sit beautifully around each other in a mix. But if I did have the time and the inclination, I might experiment with other things, and you can. But that is all unique to this microphone. But for Katie's vocals, we're going to do this. We're going to leave it linear. Maybe we'll hear it on 40, but we'll probably just stay linear and just take out any low rumble in the mix. We'll leave it on 0. We'll go full tube, and we'll go to cardioid, and that'll be it. Excellent. Well, thanks ever so much for watching that. To me, it's really important to share and show what it's like to actually A, mentor, and B, be an apprentice and learn that kind of stuff. I think that sometimes I myself have to be reminded of it, and actually the process of doing that and talking through with you also reminded me of a lot of stuff and reminded me as a role as a mentor, because I've had different things over the years. I've had direct contact with guys that are great producers and engineers and had more of an osmosis experience, i.e. being in the room. But I also was a musician, and so I was kind of that annoying guy in the band that was always like, why are you doing that? What's going on? Blah, 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 blah. So it's easier. I think the reason why I bring it up is because when you're the musician and you're hiring a producer or an engineer or the mixer, it's okay for you to ask dumb questions, because you know what? You're paying for it. I mean, frankly, if you're going to go, and that is actually one way I've heard a couple of people, Joe Salyers was talking to me about this today. He hired a really famous Nashville mixer to mix one of his band's songs, and then sat there for like 2 days asking him 1,000 questions. And at the end of the session, the mixer was like, you know what? You didn't have to pay me for this. I could have given you free advice. The mixer got what was going on. But it's a very relevant thing, I think, for me, because I was a musician in bands. When we hired Don Smith to make a record, who happened to be one of the greatest ever engineers, made all Tom Petty records, after Shelley made those records, made the Cracker Kerosene Hat record, made Stones records, Keith Richards solo records, just beautiful sounding albums. So I got like a lot of free information from him because I could be the annoying guy in the band. What's he going to do? He's not going to tell me to shut up. I was writing the songs, you know, I was playing the instruments. So,
what was the band?
Oh no.
For curious minds.
Yes. For you can ask the questions below, and we'll put links. As a musician, you could ask the dumb questions. So the thing for me for doing this is to encourage, because when you are an apprentice, you are assisting, or most of the time these days, and for a long time now, interning, working for free. Coming in, working the same 12 to 15 hours that I have to do, but not getting paid. That is very typical. That is very, very typical. You have to do that in LA if you want to get ahead. You know, Alex is coming here working for free, and he's a paid shredding keyboard player. But he wants to make new relationships. And he's already worked a session with Jack Douglas. And I introduced him, hey, Alex is a great keyboard player. I mean, this is how you get gigs. You put yourself into situations. But I think it's important in this mentoring situation to say it's okay to ask questions. There's inappropriate times, like when I'm working with a singer trying to get an intimate vocal out of her. So what mic are you using? It's probably not the right time. But during setup, and I'm plugging in the mic and doing it, that was perfect to talk about it and explain. And I think it is appropriate to ask those questions. It's just understanding, and I think it is important for us as mentors, as producers, engineers that have interns, to impart that knowledge. Because for me, the Produce Like a Pro thing is all about democratization of music, about helping each other out, about creating a real sense of community, because that old school elitism has gone, except for like 6 people. The rest of the music industry is hustling and creating opportunities, and the more we help each other, the more we can grow together. So I think for me, is like when I see the recording connection principle, I like it as long, and this is important, I like it if it's done properly. I'll be honest, it's like if you're going to end up just running it and getting coffee and stuff like that, then it doesn't work. But for me, it works when the responsibility of the producer, the engineer, the studio owner is to properly mentor. So as ever, please go to producelikeapro.com, sign up for the email list, And there's some kind of subscribe thing flying around somewhere down there. So please subscribe and ask tons of questions because we're talking about microphones and stuff. So ask loads of questions and I'll try my best to ask them. You can also ask them of Natalie and she can ask them. So have a marvellous time recording and mixing, and we'll speak to you again soon.